And he 2 weeks later, that company wired us $1 million. We turned the company around, we sold it. It changed my life. I come from a pretty blue collar family in Nebraska, and I could finally get married because I could afford a wedding. He didn't ask for a dollar. He said, I'll meet you tomorrow. We'll spend all day with you. We're gonna workshop this. Just for free. I said, oh my God. They didn't ask for anything. They were just there to help and they wanted to help you. And it was the most incredible sign of absolute giving. They are incredibly successful today. They have all these founders who give them equity in their companies just to get their help, and they make hand over fist, and that's just how they work. They give. So it's beautiful.
I generally have an issue with hope because it means you're not content with right now.
I think the two things you can hold both to be true. One is there's nothing better than it in person. And two is the future of work is fully remote.
I would just take more Healey time anytime. What's going on, Healey? How you doing?
How's it going?
Not bad, man. We've chatted a bunch, but I'm always excited to see you. That was 6 months that I spent at Atomic with you was so much fun.
It was a lot of fun, man. I miss working with you. I have a feeling we're going to find a way to work together again pretty soon.
I would love to, man. Honestly, like I would say it to a lot of the folks that like know you and like we work together. Like if I can exchange an hour with you to 1 minute with Healey, I'm sorry. I'm going to take Healey.
Ah, thanks, man. That's really kind. Tell my wife that, will you?
Sure. Give me your number. I'll tell her too. So, dude, you and I have been spending quite a bit of time together. But for the folks that don't know you, I would love an intro.
Yeah, for sure. My name's Healey Cypher. I'm from Nebraska, which is a small state in the center of the country that no one's been to. I grew up for most of my life in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which is a little bit of a plot twist. And then after a short I got into my dream school at Penn in Philly, went to consulting in New York, didn't love it, but got caught during the kind of global financial crisis, and then jumped into startups in 2010 and hit a lottery. We sold 7 months after I joined. It was a $75 million exit. There's only 21 of us. And it changed my life. I come from a pretty blue collar family in Nebraska, and I could finally get married because I could afford a wedding. My wife's family couldn't afford that either. And I got addicted. And so I've been running and selling companies for the bulk of my career. I sold my third one back in 2019. And one thing, and this, but a warning to anyone else, I love boring businesses. Like I just love them. And this one was no different. If you walk into a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Wendy's and one of those touchscreen kiosks we order food, we did all those for the top 40 quick service restaurants. It's a great business. And we sold it for an all cash deal. And it was one of those kind of life opportunities where I got to figure out what I wanted to do. For a while, I was like, I'm going to move to Oaxaca and eat crickets. Turns out I didn't love crickets, but what I did love is building company. And so I joined Atomic as COO and a partner, I guess, 4 years ago. And it's been wonderful. And as part of that journey, and I told Jack, the founder, this would happen. I've fallen in love with one of the porcos that I started called Boom Pop. And I'm the CEO there and having a great time. So that's me. I have an amazing wife, Rachel, who's a professor, and 2 kids, 3 and 1. And I like to, fly, motorcycle, scuba dive, kind of adventure stuff. And
I
most
love it, man.
importantly, I try to be a good person all the time. And I think that's why we're chatting.
Honestly, we're chatting because I would just take more Healey time anytime. You know what I mean? Dude, I have a few questions. So, one, okay, I'll start with this one. What kind of person can relate to you the most? Can you describe them?
Hmm. Yeah. I'll give you a couple answers. One is, and I got this from Brian Chesky at Airbnb, who I think is just a wonderfully fantastic person. And he said there's 2 types of people in the world, Healy. There's learners and there's knowers. Knowers know the answer to everything. They've experienced everything, and learners are lifelong. So I think if you're a learner, you're probably going to be more aligned with me. You feel like life is about learning. Second is you're probably pretty ambitious. I find that to be true of myself. I always want to get better. I've got my sights set on very high places, and I put a huge amount of energy into getting to those places. I think life's a game, and I don't know if it really matters what we do on this earth, but that's what I want to do. So if you feel ambitious, do it. And the third thing is everything you do has a spiritual undercurrent. And that's a little less obvious because I think when you meet me, I come across as this like quintessential tech CEO sometimes. I'm like, "Oh, I fly a motorcycle." Okay, you D-bag, like, we get it. Mhm. And one of the things I don't talk about a ton, but is very true, is I spend a huge amount of time on contemplating why we're here, on trying to understand what's really going on and what the point of this all is, and I found this wonderful solace of truth, which is I found that weaving in what I am learning to be true about the kind of spiritual nature of things ends up making my life feel so much more full. So I guess inclusion, you're a learner, you're ambitious, and you think that being a good person in business is part of your spiritual journey. Like those are the 3 things.
Dude, I remember the first time we actually chatted. It's like first ever call we had. I was like, "What's going on?" And we talked about work a little bit. I was like, "I don't know what's going on."
Yeah.
And you shared how you lost one of your friends
Yeah.
at that moment. And I shared back how I lost a friend a couple weeks back, and it was a
Yeah.
similar situation. Dude, like initially I was like, he's the CEO of Atomic, like I'm an FIR, need to keep it like in a sense kosher. But right then I'm like, I love this guy. Like we just talked like the toughest thing and like we're
For sure.
both teared up. And like
Gotta do it.
I hear you on the last one. I was waiting for you to say this spiritual undercurrent that you just did.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah. I think we see that in each other.
So dude, there's a thing you mentioned, and I read it in a bunch of places, that when you are not sure about what decision to make, you tend to lean towards the decision that should you make it, your son Theo will be proud of you. Love
Yeah.
you to elaborate on this.
Yeah, thanks, man. One of the harder lessons I learned as my positions elevated over time in my career was that there was a huge amount of very hard discussions that would happen in closed doors, and the morality wasn't as obvious as you'd think. Like, for example, you're deciding how deep to riff a company for the purposes of preserving the longevity of the company and the kind of like the runway or the cash balance or the safety or whatever it is. And those are hard. Those are really hard discussions because at one point you have this team of people you personally hired, you think is wonderful, you want to employ them. On the other hand, if you fly off a cliff and the whole company goes down, you've mucked it for everyone. And so, where does it sit? Or cap table construction. There's a ton of things that just aren't as obvious as you'd think. And in those moments, and this happened, I think, when my son Theo was born, but now it's true of both Theo and Lily, both my kids who I love. I asked myself, if Theo or Lily were in the room right now and they heard how I was talking about it and they saw how I made this decision, would they be proud of their dad? And I almost get emotional saying that. And it's made everything so much insanely easier. You know, it's like this wonderful clarifying thing. And so for me, it's a shortcut that I think is wildly helpful. And there's a bunch of things loaded, but if you just ask yourself, of the people that you love most on the planet or that look up to you, when you make certain decisions, how would they respond? Would it support their view of you as a hero and someone who's wonderful, or would it break the veneer? And that's how I think about it.
I love it, dude. There's a This reminds me of a previous episode I did with my buddy Jake Hirsch, and he was saying how he learned to factor in human dignity in decisions.
Yes.
He's pretty like deep in public sector, so like he has massive impact. And this reminds me of that. Like what you're saying very much reminds me of that. And there's a saying that I heard, I might have actually heard it from you. I have a playbook called Parenting Playbook, and you have a bunch of lines on it. Like every time you say something, I just write it down.
Like you mentioned.
I might have heard this from you. You said the only people that remember you worked really late were your kids. And that honestly changed how I saw myself working because I'm like, I will never stop working. And then I was like, no, I'm going to have kids soon. That's going to
There's
change.
related, there's a bunch of studies on the top 5 things that people regret most in their deathbed. I scour them. I find it the most pointed, helpful moment. Like on the moment of the ending of this life, you go, "How could I have done it better?" And one of the top ones actually mostly for men, was I spent way too much time working and not enough time with family and friends. And there's other ones that are useful too, but I think, yeah, it reminds you, like, end
Yeah.
of the day, here's another version of it. And this sounds like nihilistic, and I suppose it is, but I'll ask you a question. Who was the richest person on the planet 300 years ago?
Well, depends on how you define rich.
Yeah,
But
but
I'd
let's
probably
just
say like Cornelius van der Tunt or something. Like he built all the
th
railroads, or you know what I
those are
mean?
great guesses, but I guess the kind of point is no one really cares or knows right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Whoever
and
died happiest, whoever smiled the hardest while on
well,
deathbed.
no, yeah, I'll try to the full point. So I'll get more provocative. Who was the most popular prophet 10,000 years ago? Prophet. Everyone thought that was God.
Buddha. There'll be some
Yeah,
form of Buddha,
yeah,
or
yeah.
nobody knows.
And that's kind of the point is, our existence is so fleeting that it's, I think, very appropriate to remind ourselves that all the things we're pursuing, whatever it is, like a certain amount of money or a certain title or a certain like being remembered, like no one will remember you. And that's
Yeah.
hard to say, but literally no one will remember you when you die. And in fact, the human species will probably go extinct. That sounds awful, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to say, hey, given that all this probably doesn't matter in the way that you think it matters, focus on being a great person and the relationships you have and growing your compassion as a person and experiencing life and learning. That's the point of life. It's not to have your name on a plaque that no one reads in 1,000 years. And so I call this optimistic nihilism. It's a view of life that's not designed to be like a bummer. It's as amazing. Like you can literally live any life you want.
My grandmother used to tell me, like, whenever I was really anxious and I called her, like, God bless her soul, she wouldn't even understand exactly what I'm talking about, like what decision I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
And she always used to ask, would this matter in 100 years?
Oh,
And she
wow.
specifically picked 100 because, like, you died, like, you are
You're
gone
done.
yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would this matter in 100 years?
Great
And
question.
most things were like, nah. She's like, why are
Yeah.
you worrying about it?
Right.
It was the easiest way for me to snap back to reality.
Yep.
Like the way she used to say it. I like what you asked. I just thought about the inverse of it. Who would be the most, like the richest person or the most famous prophet in a like 10,000 years from now?
Right.
You know what I mean? One, we don't know. Two,
No idea.
doesn't matter. Like it makes you think about how like nothing, like everything right now will change, and like the
Yeah,
emphasis we put on exactly doing this or exactly not doing that still doesn't do anything.
totally.
There's a
Totally.
there's a YouTube channel called Kirkesacht. It's a very hard German name, but it means in a nutshell. It's my favorite thing. It's like cartoons that are sciencey. And there in one of their videos is said, we are a fraction of the humans that will exist should we not go extinct.
Yeah.
So like really in that arc, all we have to do is to make sure the people that come from us are good. So that amplifies.
Yeah. That's right.
The
Yeah,
rest
that's
of the
right.
things is like it will change million times over.
Totally agree. Totally agree. That's good.
Dude, I want to ask you the main question. I would love to hear about a time when things were really tough and a lending hand came and helped you out of it.
For sure. Yeah. I've got the perfect example. So my second company, it was the first startup where I was a CEO. I wasn't like the number two person. I was a CEO and it was my responsibility. And the company's called Oak. We invented the kind of magic mirror category. So if you ever see a mirror that's touchscreen, we invented that tech. And we decided to, instead of targeting consumers, we decided to start a B2B company and specifically focus on the use case of when you're in a fitting room in a retail fashion house. So think like Ralph Lauren or LVMH, whatever, even Nike. There's a moment where you probably need help. Like your pants are off. You love, and by the way, you'd love to know what are the other cuts, colors, and sizes available in stock right now. And I'd love for someone to bring those to me. And even if you could help me get a sense of what would look great with that outfit, I'd love to check those out. You can't, and everyone's been through this. Your pants are off, you're sticking your head out the curtain going, help, and no one's there. And what do you do? And so we built this mirror. You walk in, it would recognize that you came in because it had RFID behind the mirror. and it would do all those things. The mirror turned into a touch screen. It was this beautiful experience, and we were dialed in. Like, we knew that people didn't know when they saw a mirror that you'd touch a mirror. No one thinks of a mirror form factor that way. When you walked in, we did this thing. I still chuckle about. We turned the lights on a little too bright, and you were like, "Whoa!" And then this little menu opened up on the mirror that said change lighting. It was like club mode, whatever, daylight. And so you press club mode, the lights would go down, and you go, "Oh, I know how to work this thing." And it's a
I
way
love
of kind of
that.
using gaming methodology, like instant win, constant reinforcement. And we had great engagement rates. Anyway, the tech was off to an amazing start. We actually launched with Ralph Lauren in their flagship Fifth Avenue. We were expanding stores with them. It was going great. And then I had this meeting with the CFO. I says, "Hey, I'll never forget it, Scott Jameson. Healey, this is the best tech we've ever seen in stores." And I was like, "Yes, I'm about to raise my series A. We're going to expand." And he goes, and I've been doing this for a while. So I'm very impressed. I said, "Thanks so much, Scott. We appreciate the partnership." Then he says, "Unfortunately, we're actually shutting down all of our stores. So
Oh,
we're not only
shit.
not gonna expand with you, we're gonna stop the relationship, and we gotta focus on the fundamentals here." And I was gutted. I was like, "Oh my gosh." And then, of course, I had a round I was trying to bring together. It fell through. So now I've got this worst case scenario. It's what most people talk about. It's the valley of death. 18 months after you've raised, you're out of cash, and I have to go to my entire team and say, "Hey, if you wanna find another job, no problem. I will help you to find the best job I can in the Bay Area. I love you. Really, no offense. But if you're willing to stay, then my wife and I will pay minimum wage for as long as we can. And we're going to try to turn this thing around." And the wildest thing, man, is every single person stayed,
Wow.
which is a lot of pressure. And at this point, I'm in probably the most depressed state I've ever been in. I felt like my life was failing. This big thing I went to go do wasn't working. My marriage was falling apart. My wife was like, "What are you doing in life?" I started every weekend, I'd just be crying and smoking and drinking. By the way, I don't drink or smoke. Give some context. It was rough. It was really rough. My wife was going, "Hey, honey, I don't get what you're doing. Like, you're not the person I married, and I don't get, like, why are you doing this to yourself?" And I was talking to a friend who had just done this incredible 180, this Aikido move where he couldn't get a company to respond about putting ads for his GPS dog collar into their dog food packets. And that same company purchased them for $110 million 12 weeks later. So I was like,
Wow.
"Steve, how'd you do it, man?" And he goes, "I had these coaches and they just walked me through it and they helped me out." And I said, "You have these coaches?" He said, "Yeah, they're weird. Like, it's based on this book and they have these three rules." And I said, "Well, what are the rules?" And the rules are, one is they'll only take an introduction to VC backed CEO from another VC backed CEO. The second is they're going to interview you for an hour before they're willing to work with you. And the third is you can never tell anyone that you're working with them. And so I get, "Look, I'm desperate. Like, whatever." So I get in the call with these coaches, and I can't disclose who they are, of course, but the one of the coaches starts and says, "Well, what's the situation?" And so I explain, "Hey, look, I've got one negotiation. It's with this big retailer. And if I get it, they may want to buy us. It could be a big amount of money. But otherwise, I'm out of money in 2 weeks. I don't have any money left personally. And I'm stressing. So I need to call up this president of this Fortune 100 retailer and tell them if they don't pay me $1 million in 2 weeks, I'm out of money. And my bills are racking up." And he goes, "That's no problem." And I was like, "Sir, I don't know if you heard what I just said. That's no problem." He was like, "Yeah, it's fine. We got it." And I was like, "Okay." And he says,
As in they know the guy or as in we got you? Like,
as in, "This is a solvable negotiation and we're going to help you to win it."
right.
And so I
Brilliant.
said, "Okay." He goes, You got to feel okay with feeling okay." And by the way, this is all free. This is a story. He didn't ask for a dollar. He said, "I'll meet you tomorrow. Me and the coach. My brother has an office down in this town close to where you live. We'll spend all day with you. We're gonna workshop this just for free." I said, "Oh my God." So I meet with him. It's the day after Thanksgiving. I'll never forget it. My family's like hiking somewhere and I'm stressing out. And they gave me a script. And he said, "Okay," at the end that we workshopped, he goes, "So now all you do is call," this guy name's Chris, "and just read in this script. You'll say this, he says this, so this, and then we'll see how it goes." I go, "Okay." And so, and I'll tell you what happened, because it's fast, and then I'll tell you why it meant so much to me, is this is the actual script. I looked it up because I knew we were chatting. First, I said, "Hey, Chris, before we get started, I wanted to make sure we're on the same page by stating a mutual goal. Is that okay with you?" He said, "Yeah." Next sentence. By the way, this whole thing is like very short. I said, "Okay, our mutual goal is to give your company enough time to work with my company so you can decide if we can be a central part of your Store of the Future initiative that could lead to a merger or acquisition." And then in the script, it said, "Ask, how does it sound? What am I missing?" And here the coach has said, if you've got it right, Chris will say the words, 2 words, "That's right." So, dude, there's no, come on, you can't read minds here. So he
Right.
makes some adjustments. I restate the mutual goal. And then Chris goes, "Yeah, that sounds right." And I was like,
Really?
"Said that's right. This is crazy." And so then I moved on to the next sentence. And by the way, the final sentence of the negotiation. And I said, "Okay, Chris, now that we have our mutual goal figured out, it's important if we're unable to get this contract signed and paid in 2 weeks, our mutual goal will be a risk. How would you like to proceed?" That was it. There's no threats. I didn't tell him any context. He didn't ask why that's the case. He goes, "Oh, I can spin up legal and we can get it done." And he 2 weeks later, that company wired us $1 million. Right before, saved the company, we turned the company around, we sold it. And I always think back to those coaches as this incredible like, they didn't ask for anything. They were just there to help and they wanted to help you. And it was the most incredible sign of absolute giving experience of giving I had ever experienced. And now look, I love them. I swear by these guys. I do actually work with them and I incentivize them with equity in all my companies. I'm like, "Hey, look, I know you're not gonna take my money, but you gotta take upside." But it was incredible for me. Truly incredible.
So, what do you think was their motivation?
I think they look at the world as similar to a VC does. One of them was a story in VC before he retired, and I think they make bets on people, and their motivation was, this is a person who seems like a good person who's really stressed. Teach him a philosophy that if he spreads this out, it'll make the world a better place. And the second is, if this ends up being great, he'll probably enter into a business relationship with us, which, by the way, I did. And they ended up making a decent amount of money when we sold, which I was very happy about.
Mhm.
But the reason I like this so much is I often think about the reciprocity models you can imbibe at work. And there's three. You can be a giver, which is what we're talking about. I'm going to give, and I don't care if you give back. And this is not about personal cost. It's not about me paying me back. I want to help you. There's matching, which tends to be the most common at work. You did this for me, I'll do this for you. Now we're even. And then there's taking, which you hear about a lot, where people try to limit their personal costs and extract as much value from you as possible. And it's really hard to like takers. And it's interesting because this actually made in my head famous by Adam Grant, who wrote this wonderful book called Give and Take. But he starts out the book with this success pyramid and says the sad thing about giving is it's on the bottom of the pyramid.
Right.
People who at their own expense give to others that they think of themselves last or taken advantage of or trampled over, they just end up being in the bottom of the pyramid. That old saying, good guys finish last. It's a really hard way. It's a hard thing to hear. And so then, of course, you ask yourself, who's at the top of the pyramid? And you think about it and you wonder, is it matchers? Is it probably takers or a bunch of selfish a-holes? And this is where it gets good. He says, actually, at the top of the pyramid is also givers. And that's because if you're a giver, everyone wants you to win because they know you're going to pull them up with you. And it's a lot easier to win when everyone wants you to win. And he talks about all the kind of implications there. And I think this example to me was just quintessential giving. And so we're going to give and we have no expectations. There's a chance it doesn't work. We have no idea. We're just going to do this because it's the right thing to do. We're going to help you out. And there's no one in the world who can help you out like we can. And they are, by the way, and they were already very successful. They are incredibly successful today. They have all these founders who give them equity in their companies just to get their help, and they make hand over fist, and they are just that's just how they work. They give. So it's beautiful.
Dude, this reminds me of Matt Mashari, and I have no idea if he's one of the folks. I actually don't know
He's
who
not,
the
but
three
who
folks
is
are.
that? Who is that?
Matt Mashari, he lives in California. He's had a few exits of his own, and he wrote the book The Great CEO Within.
Oh,
So this book is the ultimate productivity model for all CEOs. Every
okay.
time I ask like a founder friend, I'm like, how do you do this bit? He just sends me a copy of his book. And dude,
Really?
his book is on Google Drive. He shared it publicly. It's not a paid
Wow. The
thing.
CEO within.
The great CEO within.
Great CEO within.
And
Wait, I'm looking right now. This
so
is awesome.
dude had a chance to work with him at this company I was at called Fellow, one of my favorite companies.
Wait,
And the
wait,
CEO,
Fellow the at-home testing company?
no, it's like meeting note taking.
Oh, okay,
Like
okay,
the
okay.
meeting collaboration.
Okay,
Yeah, it's just one of my favorite companies. Like I had the CEO's an old friend. He was on my podcast as well.
amazing.
And through that, we met Matt. So we were trying to work something out and it didn't work. But it was brilliant that every time like we contacted Matt, we actually got through the main, like the meat of the meeting super quickly. And then after it was like, how you doing? What's going on
That's
with you?
great. Efficient
And he was
guy.
just there. Yeah, like every time I read up on him or listen to his podcasts and stuff, he literally just wants to feel good by spreading, like, by seeing the reflection of good that he spread.
That's great.
And some might say that's egotistical, but I'm like, that's the best kind of egotistical. I would rather have that than
Yeah,
the
all day.
other type.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no question. No question. That's great.
Yeah, but I'm a huge fan of that guy.
I'm gonna check that out. The great CEO within.
Yeah, man. It's like I I had an issue with responsiveness. So
Mm,
this is just a fact. This year, my goal was to be responsive and be present in conversations. So when I'm talking to friends, especially loved ones,
yeah,
I get anxious. I only think about the tasks like that are shared
yeah,
between them. And then I'm like, did you do this? Did you do this? You should
yeah,
probably do it
yeah.
this way.
Logistics.
Yeah. And then later I realized I'm just transferring my anxiety. I'm
Mm.
just making their life worse. It was such a massive revelation. Like my brother recently moved to Toronto. He brought his whole company over. I love his company. And like I'm on the board and I just love him and the company. So every time we hang out, I'm like, what about this? Have you talked to this guy and said this?
Yeah,
Have you
yeah.
talked to this other bit? And at some point, he's like, you just talk about tasks all the time. So both of these are chapters in Matt's book.
Wow,
And he has very specific instructions like, to do this.
it's
And
great.
honestly, man, it was fascinating. So I'm like, ah, somebody's giving me tactical advice.
It was awesome.
And yeah, and again, emphasis on this book is free. It's on Google Drive. He's
I
published it
literally see it.
everywhere. Like
It's just like I see it here. It's just a Google Doc. It's amazing.
this dude is the ultimate giver I have met in our
Um,
field. I haven't met everybody. I don't know much, but just
this is
a
great.
huge fan of this guy.
Great. Thanks, man. This is awesome. I'm gonna scour this. Definitely.
Dude, I have a different question. You recently wrote in praise of hope as a strategy.
Oh, no. Actually,
I have an issue with this.
it wasn't. It was the opposite. It was the opposite. I said hope isn't a strategy.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. So
Yeah.
I read wrong. I read wrong. Like, I generally have an issue with hope because it means you're not content with right now.
Well,
Like, I call it hopium.
what that's really funny. Hope he's funny. What it more meant was like, I think people can rely on magic sometimes. They're like, "Blah, blah, 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 and magic's gonna happen, and then we'll be $1 billion company." And I think that's a road to a lot of disappointment.
All right, I'm happy you
Yeah, yeah,
cleared
yeah.
that
I
out.
think
I
you're on
was
the
like,
same page.
I agree, but afterwards I'm like, hope.
No, no, yeah.
Dude, your company, Boom Pop. I
Yeah,
have a question. For those that don't know it, go check it out. But
thank you,
I have
yes.
a very simple question. It's targeting remote companies, but it's an anti-remote company. It's like an anti-remote company. And like that just cracks my brain. Like
I love
it's
yeah, I
hard
love
to
Boom Pop.
resolve.
I guess for people who know about Boom Pop, we're obviously an emerging brand. 18 months ago, we started this kind of next gen travel company, and what we focus on is groups. And think of At companies, you do offsites, you have company kickoffs, you have sales kickoffs. There's all these kind of reasons you get together, bring clients together, your teams together. And we just stumbled across the realization that it was a wildly old school experience to do this. Like you can't, for example, book over 10 hotel rooms online. I don't know if you knew that. You have to call someone. It's just mind blowing.
Right.
And so when we started Boom Pop, though, we didn't set out to be like an events company or a travel company. We said, what do we believe? Like, why do we exist? And the why was we believe every human wants a sense of belonging and wants to feel important. And as we thought about it, we realized we're not going to probably help that in friends and family. We don't have any business there. We're probably not going to help with affiliate affinity groups. They got it figured out. But gosh, when it comes to work, where we spend a third of our life and a third of it's asleep, so it's a really big part of how we spend our time. Why not focus on human connections there and how we can make those more meaningful? It's more fun to work with friends than just with random super professional folks. And when the pandemic hit, we started off initially actually as a virtual events marketplace. It was like curated events and hosted events. Yeah, do you want to ship cocktail making boxes to everyone? It's a class with a handsome man with a mustache and suspenders, and or is it a magic show for the kids or something interesting online for a game for your leadership team? And it was great. And then 18 months ago, all of our clients said, "Hey, I don't want to do that anymore because it turns out when the cocktail class is over and I close my computer, I'm still drunk. I'm just by myself in the basement now. That's kind of weird.
Right. Right.
Can you help us to get together in person? We need to do that." And when we looked at all the stats, my gosh, getting together in person, it increases productivity, increases profitability of a company, it decreases churn. Every 90 days, there's this kind of belief that humans, specifically at work, inhabit a 90-day world. And you have to remind them of who they're working with and why they're working on that. And I think getting in person, to getting together in person is a very important way to do that. And so we begrudgingly started this next gen travel company. And as we've done it, we have just seen the most wonderful results. Like the companies that work with us are so successful. They get together regularly. They're employed. Like you never see when photos come back because photographers are often there. You never see photos when people are bummed to get together. They're always happy. It's exciting. And so what I'd say is this, and I think the two things you can hold both to be true. One is there's nothing better than in person. And two is the future of work is fully remote. And how those things meet, I think, is a cadence of getting together in person on a regular basis with intention. And that's what Pumap's about. But I think it's relevant to this because the reason we exist, we talk about this. We started every board meeting this way, every Friday meeting, we have an all hands. It's because we believe in that human value of wanting to be part of something, and that's what motivates us.
You just reaffirmed the whole anti-remote. Like
Yeah.
it's interesting that way. I don't know. Like as techies, we're used to remote. Like
Yeah.
I, when I'm consulting or when I'm helping companies, when I'm working anywhere, it's the typical thing is just to be at home.
So
I remember when COVID first hit, everyone's like, "Oh, was remote hard?" I'm like, "Dude, everybody came to my house. Like I was already
yeah.
remote. You're
That's
like this was not weird for me."
right. That's great.
But that human connection bit, you're totally right.
Yeah.
It's it's hard not to sit face to face, belly to belly, and just
Yeah.
like nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
Like you can just read someone's vibe. I had a mentor who used to always say, if you don't meet with your employees or employers, like basically the people you work with, your communication would be about 40% less efficient.
Yeah.
That's the part of stuff you don't say, you can't say. It's hard to be clear. It's
It
hard
is.
to it takes energy to be concise.
It's so
But
true.
like
Yeah. Good
like you and I
communications.
could be sitting in a meeting and like you just like glance at something and I already know. It's like,
Yeah.
don't say anything. Look at that. Interesting, huh? And then the next bit, I have like, four different avenues you can go with. And all you have to do is like a shrug and be like, wow, they just had a whole conversation. You can't do that unless you get the person's vibe.
Totally. Yeah, that's right. It is really hard to get vibe without meeting someone in person. But then the nice thing is, I think when you do meet someone, especially on a regular basis, you get that vibe. It then makes the virtual part a lot easier too, because you get them, and then when you get together, yeah, no, I totally agree, man. I'm obviously a big fan. And make it a bet. And look, I don't think I'm unique in this viewpoint. right? If you look at the bulk of how people wanna work, g when people went remote, and obviously you could mention a lot of folks are used to it, but when it became more universal in the pandemic, it wasn't just that it was like an hour less of work because 'cause I'm not commuting anymore. What it really was, it was 100 to 200% more free time every day for me to work on my health, spend time with my kids, spend time with my partner, meditate. And that to me is the real thing. Like, I think about my cadence of working remote. I work way more remote, way more because I have my set stuff that I do every single day, but and it's great. I can run, get a haircut, I can get my kid from school, like all these lovely things. But then when my wife and I are done hanging out, I'll just go back to it and I keep going. And I didn't waste any time commuting. And even when you do go to the office, okay, let's say worst case, it's 30 minutes one way. That's an hour of time. And when you are really high achieving and ambitious, you get frustrated by that wasted hour of time because it's not like you want to use that for something else.
Yeah, I now commute about let's say almost an hour, let's call it,
One way.
from home to office. Yeah, either way,
Really?
either which way. So like
Yeah.
it's about 2 hours of commute. I don't have to come here. I just get a little bit of cabin fever because I'm mainly just working with myself, and
Yeah.
it's like context switching is a little hard. If I'm with a team, I'd rather just be zen. The one bit about commuting is that I get to read.
Oh, you
I
listen.
am now finishing like a book in 3 weeks, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
But it's very consistent where the second I'm done commuting, my energy is at least 20% less than when I went in.
For sure.
That to me is a huge cost.
Totally.
That's when reading was fun.
Yeah.
It's like I go into whatever the situation is going through, you're getting way too much state change. And I'm a routine person. I know exactly what I'm going to do the next day because everything's laid out and my calendar is just tight. But when you're commuting, it's just you're getting into the craziness of the world.
Yeah.
The energy at which I attack my most important task first thing in the morning is about 20% less.
Mm.
And that shows. That shows. Like this has now become I've gone really nuanced with it, but this has become my biggest qualm.
I think there's a cognitive drag. And again, we're saying all this stuff while also saying it's incredibly important to be together in person. And that's the irony you're pointing out, which is I think it's true. Like for early companies, it can be very effective to be in person. I think getting together, like I would much rather think about this. I would much rather instead of commuting an hour every day, which is 5 hours a week at least, or whatever, call it 10 for you. I'd rather spend 8 hours flying one day, a quarter. I'm with everyone dedicated. Like every meal is together, every activity, you're just with them. It's super fun, it's super social. You're out of your normal, super efficient, and then leaving. And it's think about the trade-offs. You can do all this while spending way less money on office time, honestly having access to way better talent all over, not limiting yourself to things, having hyper effective time, way less commute, like all the things kind of work. So I'm a pretty ardent believer that and by the way, Boom Pop doesn't only work with remote companies. It doesn't matter. Like here's another thing I want to talk about. Every company over 50 or 100 people inherently becomes distributed anyway. You're not gonna all be
Yeah,
in the same
exactly.
office. So, it just seems like a ridiculous argument to me, you know what I mean? Oh, remotes, it's like, you're on different floors. You don't see each other. That just doesn't make any sense. I think what people don't talk about, most companies now, the reason they're pushing return to office actually is because they don't want to do a layoff, but they want to slim their workforce, and this way they know people will quit.
Ooh,
Yeah, that's
interesting.
actually a
It's a
thing in HR circles. Like, everyone in HR is,
it's a
"Yeah, that's."
nice tactic.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
I was having this argument with some finance friends last week. They're like, no, like everything will come back. Like, some things will. I was like, dude, imagine a few hundred years from now when we are all distributed not on the same planet.
Yeah.
Like some people are on satellites around the
Multi-planetary
globe, some
species.
people are
Yeah.
on moons,
Yeah.
some people are on the asteroid belt. Are you gonna enforce people are together? Like
Right.
you can't.
It's
You'd be limiting by so many factors,
yeah.
and you're gonna run a mediocre company. So
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
stop arguing this. So, dude, I want to ask you the last question. What help are you always willing to give?
Thanks, man. I am always willing to I think this is a fast, easy one. If any founder is ever about to go out and ask for money, I'm always willing to give you a really fast run through of the perfect deck for your company, perfect pitch deck. I'm always willing to do that. I think I've got it nailed down to 12 slide perfection. I give you examples and I'm more than happy to do it. That's a fast one. And it's specifically, I find like founder, it's so hard to know how to tell your story. And I've messed it up so many times. So they got it dialed in. I'm always happy to do that.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm sure a bunch of people would actually hit you up
Yeah,
extra for
do it.
this.
Shoot me a
Dude,
note. Healey at cypher.com. Pretty easy.
dude, this was fun.
It was a
Like
lot
I
of
was
fun. Thank
excited about this for a while. I'm
you.
so happy we got to chat, and I'm sure we're gonna chat again.
Hell yeah.
Dude, thanks for coming on.
Thanks,
Appreciate
man.
you.
This is a lot of fun.